The president says he is keeping a promise he made to veterans. Many veterans, especially those returning from war zones, struggle, as you know, with mental illness. Well, beginning March 9th, all service members transitioning into civilian life will automatically be enrolled in the VA mental health care for their first 12 months when they are out of the military. President Trump signing an executive order yesterday as a way to combat the alarmingly high rate of suicides among veterans. It also calls for a plan to be established to generate it. And when we talk about that high number, it is tough to ignore. The Department of Veterans Affairs says the risk for suicide is 22% higher among veterans than it is among civilians. And keep in mind, every single day in this country, 20 retired servicemen or women take their lives. Typically, about 14 of those are veterans who were not under the care of the VA. The Secretary for Veterans Affairs spoke about this new measure.
That 12-month period after you leave service is the highest risk for suicide, almost 1.5 to 2 times highest risk in that first 12 months when you leave the service. And currently, up until your executive order, only 40% of those service members had coverage in the VA to get mental health. Now, 100% will have that coverage.
So what could this change? Joining me now is Sarah Verardo. She's the executive director of the Independence Fund. She is also the wife of a veteran who has and is still undergoing numerous surgeries, and you are dealing with the VA every single day. Sarah, good to have you back with us.
Thanks for having me, Erica.
So this executive order that the president signed yesterday, what does this accomplish?
This is a great start. You know, the president, when he campaigned, veterans came out in record numbers for this election because he had a 10-point plan on how to improve the VA. And a big part of that was making sure the transition piece, transitioning from DOD care to VA care, is going to be unencumbered by bureaucratic process. And so yesterday really looked at those invisible injuries, which are the hallmark injuries on the war on terror, which is PTSD and TBI.
So that's part of getting this started. There's also a larger issue of the VA in general, as we know, and we've been talking about for a number of years at this point in this country. The hurdles that are there, the hiccups that are there that make it difficult for veterans to get the care they need and deserve. You have had the president's ear on this, and you are uniquely positioned to talk to him about what's happening. And yet I know that you are not entirely happy with what you've seen in this first year. Where has the mark been missed, Sarah? What else needs to be done?
I think overwhelmingly, I mean, we're working really closely with the White House, with the Office of Public Liaison. They have a military spouse and leadership there. So to me, that's very encouraging. And I'm super pleased and excited by that. The issue is, and this is the fundamental issue with the VA, the president unequivocally promised that a veteran can choose his or her own care provider, either within the VA system or private service, and that the government would pay for it. And to date, we have not yet seen that. And the 2 bills that have come out of committee, if the president does sign either one of those, they're a good step forward, but it's not the full measure of what the president promised.
And what do you think is the hurdle there? Because it seems like this is a win-win. Not only is it good for the people who need this care, the veterans of this country, who's going to oppose that?
You know, you'd be surprised, Erica. There are so many people. The VA is very unionized. There are people, the care providers are wonderful, but the process, the people who are putting these systems in place, there's no motivation for change. And until the VA has to compete for veteran dollars by allowing veterans to get care at the private sector, there's no motivation for those VA employees to change.
So what do you think will change that then? I mean, look, from a business perspective, I guess we could say we understand it. But what is actually going to bring about the change that was promised, specifically in terms of choosing your health care provider, if we can't get past it?
My understanding is that the president has told Congress to bring him a legislation that does do exactly what he promised. And so far, the 2 bills that we're seeing out of committee right now don't do that. So it's my hope that the president and the secretary really force Congress to keep that promise, that the veteran will be completely empowered to be able to provide their own health care, be in charge of it. You know, we're seeing some legislation proposals that are a step forward, but still the McCain-Moran bill gives us an example that the veteran would be able to choose his or her own provider only if the VA agrees to that. So still, we're talking about bureaucratic process that is really hindering care.
How much response are you getting from lawmakers themselves? The president is one thing. I know you talked about the liaison office, which has been very helpful for you. But the lawmakers ultimately are the ones drafting these bills.
I think that part of the issue is we have some great veterans in Congress, but overall, the day-to-day challenges, lawmakers need to be talking to those caregivers like myself who have walked this very long, very hard journey on the way home from war. My husband has had more than 100 surgeries. We've spent years recovering. And yet the most difficult part of his catastrophic combat injuries has been dealing with such a broken VA system. And I think it's really vital that lawmakers hear from the spouses and caregivers, especially of the most catastrophically wounded.
Absolutely. We were just looking at a picture of Mike there, and I know you said he just had another surgery, but he's doing well, which we are happy to hear. Sarah, appreciate you joining us, bringing us up to speed on a lot of this stuff. We'll continue to stay on it. Best to you and your entire family. Thank you.
Thank you.